Hello. In this video, we are going to continue to go through the development process for our second web development project or activity. And what we want to do here is, in our last video, we kind of got to this stage where simply we have our web template set up, and we loaded something called JQuery and put a file on the internet that holds some information in a JSON format for us. What we want to do in this video is now start to access that. So what we're going to do is first we're going to make a new file, and we're going to call it stage2json.html. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything from stage 1 and copy it into stage 2 and change my title to stage 2 and save that. Now, in the last video, this was a little bit of script that we wrote just to check to make sure jQuery was loading, and it does. This is always a nice little thing when you do use some external resource. Writing a little section of code just to make sure that resource is loading properly is really important. Nothing's worse than spending a long time trying to figure out why your code isn't working, only to realize that you don't have access to the resource. But we're going to delete that right now. And now, if I come back to this site, we've made our stage2.json, and we're going to access the data. So to access the data, we're going to take this code segment and we're going to put this into our script. Now, let me take a second and explain this, because this is a fine line between copying code and just knowing what it does versus copying code and understanding how it does it. So I've created this var up here called my data, and this is for a little bit later. But I've decided to put it in there now. This is going to help me kind of move my data around into different functions and do some other things with it. But we're not going to touch this for a while. I'm not going to get into it now, but in terms of variable visibility, another way we say that is variable scope. That is where it's accessible and visible. You're going to come across var and let. I have a little explanation on the sidebar going over the difference between a var versus a let statement, and it's worth taking some time and looking that up. But I'm just going to use var in this case. The second variable I have here is what's called a static URL. Well, it's called static URL, and it simply is a string that is a URL link to where my data is stored. Now, currently you've pasted that in there, and that's a link to my own personal data, but you presumably want to access your own data. So let me show you how to get your own static URL. So you're going to go to your GitHub site, and you're going to go into your whatever you've named your HIV infection rates JSON file, and you should be here. And now what you do is you select this button here called raw, and when I select this, it's going to open up this as a page, and here it is. And all I have to do is copy this bar on the top. So, later on as you're taking this knowledge and you're kind of accessing some different JSON data, basically you can put all you want in the data folder and then just make sure you get the raw link, which we now have. And then we come back into here and we paste that in our static URL. So now this next line. This looks a little funky, so let me explain. What this is the $sign is a shorthand notation for accessing a jQuery function. So when you see that, that's a way of saying go out to jQuery and access a function that you have, and specifically we're going to access this function called getJSON. And what that does is it has two parameters. It basically has a static URL, which is a string, and that is basically where the data is. And then we have this really interesting parameter that's kind of confusing if you aren't used to this. We're passing as a parameter a function into here. And what this is simply a function that you want to execute when this getJSON function is called. This is a little bit of a weird thing with JavaScript. You can use functions in all sorts of different ways than what we're usually used to. And in this case, we're actually passing a function as a parameter into this other function. But for our purposes, really, this is a, takes a while playing to get used to this, but really what I want you to understand right now is this, everything in between here and here is the code that will be executed. And data is the parameter associated with this function, which I can write. So I'm going to write this function up inside of here, and that function gets passed into the getJSON function. And so now we have a console.log, which is a way of logging information to our console, and I'm going to log this variable data. So let's save this, and let's load this. And nothing shows up, and that's perfectly normal, because I haven't actually rendered any elements or had any alerts popped up. But if I hit Command-Option-I, I have this object printed to my console. And what that is that is the entirety of the JSON file. So this function, getJSON, goes out and it will take this URL, and it will, however it does it, will go to that URL, it will pull all the information, and then it will run this function where the data variable is the JSON information. So inside here, whenever I write data, I'm treating all that JSON data as an object. So I come in here and I can expand this, and what we really want to do is just kind of get used to how to read this. So it might be useful to do this here. So let's kind of overlay these two things. Let me just pause it. So what getJSON does is it goes and it takes this information and it generates an object. So you see here how we have this dimensions, and then we have this open a square bracket, close a square bracket. There it is, and I can expand it, and we see that this is an array of 5 elements, and sure enough, when I expand it, there's index 0, index 1, index 2, index 3, index 4. And then inside there I have a label and a display, and GHO is the value of label, indicator is the value of display. Publish state is the value of label, publish, I can't see the rest, is the value of display. What we're really interested in is this section called fact. And you see I have 194 elements, meaning my indexes go from 0 to 193. And, the browser's been really nice, and it's kind of displays 0 to 99, 100 to 193. And I can expand this, and this has all the different countries in it. So I know for a fact that 31 is Canada. We see that Canada inside fact at index 31. The value is no data. Dims, country is Canada. And so this is what we just want to make sure we have now. We now have access to the JSON information, and we can do whatever we want with it. And in our next video, we're now going to look at how to kind of get in here and pull out some specific pieces of information. I hope this video helped. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask.